Okay, hello YouTube. This video is going to be my fourth and final installment in my series on the Queen's Gambit Declined. So this video we're going to be exclusively covering after the main moves of the Queen's Gambit. We're going to be covering the move Bishop F4, and then we're just going to have Black do what he normally does in the Queen's Gambit Declined. We're going to finish our development. We're going to play Bishop to E7, and then after Knight F3 we're simply going to castle. And this is just the normal way that we handle the QGD. We're going to castle our king side first, and then worry about our queen side pieces. And then we're going to have white play e3. So basically there's two options here for black. There's knight on b to d7 with the idea of playing c5 later, where we can recapture with the knight. And then there's the immediate c5. So for the purposes of this video, we're just going to be covering the move c5. And basically the idea here is that if white gets an isolated queen pawn, or if white is playing against black's isolated queen pawn, f4 is not the ideal square for this bishop to be. The bishop would much rather be on g5. And that's why we're playing this early c5, and that's why we play c5 in general when we see this bishop on the f4 square, is because this bishop is not ideally placed for an isolated queen pawn position. So here, pretty much universally everybody takes, and there's a good reason. If we leave the position, like if we play bishop e2, then black can simply turn this into an isolated queen pawn position for white after cd4, ed4, and then we simply take on c4, bishop c4, and now the bishop has two-stepped to e2 and c4, and then this bishop will be forced to two-step at some point when one of these two knights occupies the d5 square and gains a tempo against this f4 bishop. So basically white is playing an isolated queen pawn position at that point down 2 tempo, which of course is not favorable. And that's why every serious player for the most part will simply play d captures c5 pretty much automatically. So after dc5 we're going to be playing bishop c5, and then there's two options. White can either turn this into an isolated queen pawn position for black immediately with the move c captures d5, or white can keep the tension in the middle of the board, typically with the move pawn to a3. So the move we'll cover first is white turns it into an isolated queen pawn position with cd5. Black wants to exchange off a pair of pieces because he wants to create a threat. So after knight d5, knight d5, ed5, he's creating this threat of keeping the white king in the middle of the board with the move bishop b4. So again, if white continues passively with a move like, say, bishop e2, we can play bishop b4 check. That'll force the king to move. It'll force basically king f1. And then after king f1, we've kept the king in the middle of the board. Now, there's some people that will play this way, but I personally don't recommend it for white. I think that it's just too easy for black to finish his development and get at least easy equality, if not advantage, because, of course, it'll be very difficult to develop this rook on h1 down the road. And that's why, for the most part, people will play the move that prevents bishop b4 check here. They will play the move a3. And then black continues his development with knight c6, and then white will play bishop d3, which sets up a cute little shot with the idea of queen c2, hitting the bishop and threatening the pawn, which would effectively win a pawn. So here, black has to decide where to put this bishop, and he has two choices that are both really good. He can play bishop to d6, which was a favorite of players like Alexander Shabalov, or he can play bishop b6, which has been long considered the main line. So if you want to play bishop d6, I actually do recommend this move. I think it's very reasonable. It's been around for a long time. This move was played even back in the 1980s. And the idea is queen a4, we exchange on f4 first. Very important to remember this. Exchange on f4 and then play d4. Don't play d4 right away, but exchange and then play d4. Exchange and then play d4, and then the main idea is after they take with knight takes d4, so now you've sacrificed a pawn, you have queen a5 check. With the same idea as the old bishop b4 check, we're just going to keep this king in the middle of the board, since b4 is not going to be possible here because of knight b4 because of this pin. So they're going to have to play king to e2 or king f1, either one. We get what we want, the king stays in the middle of the board. And a few games actually ended in a draw after queen g5, bishop g4, bishop goes back to f5, and then we have perpetual check, queen g2, queen g1. So that's one way this can end. So another way that this, of course, can go is after the move d4, it is actually possible for white to castle queenside. And then there was another critical game between Yermolinsky and Alexander Shabalov that went queen d5, e takes d4, bishop e6, just trying to infiltrate with queen e6, queen to e4, and then that game continued rook fc8, which of course avoids the checkmate that was being threatened by Yermolinsky because we're threatening to run away, but we're also making huge threats against the white king, so Yermolinsky felt obligated to exchange queens at this point. And then after the queen exchange, Alexander Shabalov simply went after the pawn on d4, and a draw was agreed in Yermolinsky versus Shabalov in Seattle in 2002, although probably black at this point is still just a little bit better. So, rewinding again, the main line is just bishop back to b6, and then after the move castles kingside, you can play one of two moves here. My recommendation is actually just the simple move pawn to d4 first, and then after e4 play bishop g4, because this doesn't lose any material, this doesn't lose a pawn. You're actually losing a pawn by force after the other move, which is bishop to g4, in the main line anyway. You're losing a pawn by force. Maybe there's some alternative that I don't know about. But quite a few games, this was a big tabia for this opening for years and years, but quite a few games went in this direction. After b4, they would play rook e8, rook c1, then a6, and then white would play the sacrifice. He would play bishop a6, rook a6, and then this fork, rook a3 takes, rook takes, and then this rook would come back to a7, and then after the move, rook d6, white was winning this pawn on the d5 square, but apparently this position was still supposed to be holdable for black, and a lot of grandmasters would play this position, I guess, just to prove that they could hold this position with the 4 pawns versus 3, and the 2 bishops should be more than enough to hold a draw here. But of course, this position is very difficult to hold a draw. Actually, one of the games that happened in this position was, and there were actually quite a few games that happened in this position, but many of the games in this position went into the hundreds of moves, and actually a game that comes to mind was Anatoly Karpov versus former world champion Viswanathan Anand, went 114 moves before a draw was agreed. So if you don't want to be tortured for 114 moves, I recommend going back here, and after we get back to the main line here with the move a3, knight c6, bishop d3, I recommend after bishop b6 castles, instead of bishop g4 here, just first play d4, and then after e4, now play bishop g4, and we don't have to be tortured for 114 moves down a pawn, although those positions are supposed to be holdable for black. So after bishop g4, h3 here, the main idea is basically just to get a grip on e5 and just hold on to it. So in that regard, black's moves are all going to be focused on securing that e5 square. So bishop c7 going after e5, exchanging the f4 bishop, playing queen e7, again trying just to control e5, f6 trying to control e5, and eventually planting our knight on e5, exchanging, planting a queen on e5, exchanging, and then in this particular game, black ended up actually coming out on top. This was actually Jerome Piquet versus Vladimir Kramnik Monte Carlo in 1998. And this actually ended up in a position that was better for black, and actually Vladimir Kramnik ended up winning this game with the black pieces. And that's why I recommend holding on to the draw. I mean, holding on to the pawn, because it doesn't only give you the possibility of getting a draw with these equal positions that are relatively sedate, but it also gives you the opportunity, if you're not down a pawn, you still have a chance. You can maybe play for a win if something goes wrong later. So, okay, so those are basically the ways that white can play an isolated queen pawn position by immediately playing c takes d5. Of course, the main line is to play the move a3 right away, and then after black develops, which you should do, you should play knight c6. The main move here is queen c2. And it's pretty much the only move that gets played for the most part, because other tries just simply don't work. b4 was tried by Luc Machane against Nigel Short. This went very poorly, and of course, the main reason is, of course, black can simply sacrifice. He can play knight takes b4, a takes b4, and then bishop b4. And this big threat of knight to e4 right away, attacking this pinned knight, is huge. And it doesn't seem like there's a good way to stop this. Like, if you just play something simple, for example, like queen c2, knight e4, you don't have bishop e5 because simply f6 and e5, and then after rook a5, a5. And this is the main idea, is just throwing in this a5 to just anchor this bishop at some point, and we're simply going to lose material on the c3 square. So what we have to do instead is play something wild and crazy, which is what Luc Machane tried. After bishop b4, he tried queen b3, which is a little more aggressive. Of course, we can still play a5 to anchor this piece, and then he tried this move castles queenside, which is very energetic, but in hindsight, I personally don't want to have my king over here on the queen side where I have no pawn cover. Black just sacrificed a piece for 2 pawns, and it was 2 pawns that happened to be guarding my king. So I'm not a big fan of this, and it didn't go very well in the game. This actually went very well for Nigel Short, who just continued very simply after bishop d7, rook d4, which was likely a question mark move. Short just continued very simply with queen e7, just trying to bring his pieces over to the queen side. After bishop e5, he brought more pieces to the queen side, and then he managed to conduct a very vicious queenside attack. But I think we can say pretty safely that after the rook came to c3, I don't think that the result of this game was very much in question. We have a rook coming to c3 with rook b3, rook a3 trapping the queen as a threat, and the entire king side hasn't even gotten into this fight yet. So this actually just went very well for Nigel Short, and it's not a line that I would certainly not a line that I would recommend anybody to play for white. So going back to the main line, after c5, dc5, bishop c5, and then a3, we have knight c6. The main line here is, of course, queen c2. And then after the move queen a5, which mechanically prevents the move b4 because we're simply going to take it because of this pin on the pawn on a3, we basically have two moves here that get tried by white. We have castles queenside, and we have rook to d1. And I'm just going to make this very, very simple, exactly how to play against these two moves. So after castles queenside, I actually recommend the move knight e4, which leads to a sacrifice. It's actually a sacrificial continuation. So after knight takes e4 takes, and then they play queen takes e4, we can continue with the sacrifice, bishop a3, ba3, queen a3 check, and then we continue with rook d8 check, king e2, queen b2 check, and if they retreat the king to e1, we already have perpetual check with queen c3, queen b2, etc. And this is perpetual check. So the only way for them to avoid this is after queen b2, they need to play rook to d2 to block this check, and then we can exchange, and we can play e5. Now, what's interesting is it appears anyway that black has more than enough compensation for his lost material. He's going to be able to get enough compensation and enough play against this white king for his lost material. And that's basically all you need to know. After bishop to g5, the main move is bishop e6, queen b1, queen c3, f3, f5, just kind of, again, going after the king. Queen d3, we don't want to exchange queens, so queen b2. King d1, h6, bishop h4, g5, bishop e1, and then rook d8, queen c2, and then I would recommend the move queen a3, and not the move queen a1, which is a move that was actually played in a previous game. There was a move that was played in the game between Timoshenko and Matus in Cabela La Grande 1992, which continued with the move queen a1, and that game, of course, ended well for white, so I recommend this improvement, queen a3, which makes more sense because we get to keep the queen on the board, we get to keep all of our attacking chances, and actually the computer seems to like this, and it seems like black has every possibility of coming out on top here. So I recommend this as a way to get a good attacking position and good chances with the black pieces against the castle's queenside lines. And so then the only other line that you really need to be prepared for after c5, dc5, and then a3, knight c6, queen c2, queen a5, the only other line you really need to be prepared for is rook d1. And of course now I recommend the wild and crazy kind of modern main line, which is the move rook e8, knight d2, and then you play e5. And this rook e8 move, this is a very much a modern move. We didn't know about this move years ago. Other moves got tried here after rook d1. Of course, the main move that got tried after rook e1 was we would simply retreat. We would play this bishop back to e7 because, of course, now the possibility of d4 is on. But rook e8 is very much a modern move. And then after knight d2, e5, the main move is bishop g5, and then, of course, this idea, knight d4, taking advantage of all of these weird capture situations. And right now the main move is queen b1, bishop f5, bishop d3, and then after we exchange bishops, we bring the other knight to e4, and we have this kind of insanity. So we have both these knights on e4 and d4. And just to give you an idea of how this can move forward, I'm following one game between Aronian and Nakamura that was played back in 2017 that went knight d5, knight g5, b4, queen d8 takes, knight back to e6, knight c5. And as you can see, we've managed to simplify this position already. We have an equal position at this point after the dust is settled. We have the same number of pawns, and we've gotten a lot of the material off the board, so the position is pretty much dead. And Nakamura was able to hold this position against Vishy Anand in a game that actually didn't go much further. He managed to maintain the draw, and a draw was agreed in Aronian. If I said Anand, I'm sorry I misspoke. It's Aronian versus Nakamura, London Classic in 2017. So that's kind of the recommendation that I have for the main line. Of course, you're going to want to look at that a little bit more deeply because those are some pretty wild complications after rook to d1 and rook e8. If you want something kind of a little easier to play, I mean, the old main line was just bishop to e7. Just retreating, and you can play that position as well. But rook e8 is, of course, the new modern theory, and you can go into these complications, and you can do quite well from here. So anyways, I hope this was a good overview of all of the things that happened in the bishop f4 variation and what everybody is playing for, and I hope that this finishes your complete kind of repertoire that you can now have against the Queen's Gambit declined. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you learned something new about chess. Thank you very much for watching.